There is a detail in Genesis 22 that almost everyone passes over because the action of the story is so dramatic. Abraham binds his son, raises the knife, and the angel calls out. But the story does not begin there. It begins with a command that comes at night, and Abraham responds without a single word of protest. And that silenceth at absence of any recorded question or pleas, the first clue that this story is not about what it appears to be about. The text says that God tested Abraham, and the test begins with a verb that carries a weight few readers catch. The Hebrew is nasa, which means to test, to prove, to put to the proof. It is not a trap. It is a furnace, and Abraham walks into it without a sound. The journey takes 3 days. 3 days of walking toward a mountain with a boy and a donkey, and a fire and a knife. The text gives no interior monologue, no hint of Abraham's thoughts. The silence is so thick that when Isaac finally speaks, behold the fire and the wood. But where is the lamb for a burnt offering? The reader feels the tension physically. Abraham's answer is the first time he opens his mouth since the command came, God will provide for himself the lamb. That sentence is the hinge of the entire chapter. The Hebrew phrase is Elohim Yair lo haseh. The verb yair comes from the root rato see. Abraham does not say God will produce a lamb out of nothing. He says God will see to it. The seeing is the provision. The seeing is the action. In Hebrew thought, seeing is never passive. When God sees, things happen. The floodwaters recede when God sees Noah. The barren womb opens when God sees Rachel. Seeing in the Bible is always causative, always productive. But here is the problem that the text does not immediately resolve. Abraham does not yet know how God will see. He only knows that he is walking up a mountain with his son and the means to kill him, and he has no reason to believe that God will intervene, except that God has made promises that require Isaac to live. And promises are not the same as visibility. That gap between the promise and the visible reality is the space where the test lies. Abraham occupies that space for 3 days. Every step he takes deeper into the mountain range is a step away from any rational assurance that God will actually do what Abraham has said he will do. The cultural context of this moment is not abstract. Every person reading or hearing this story in the ancient world knew exactly what happened on mountains when a father went up with a son and a knife. The Canaanite sanctuaries were covered with the memory of firstborn offerings. The air on those hillsides smelled of burnt flesh and incense, and the ground was dark with generations of blood. The silence of Abraham is not pious submission to an abstract theological principle. It is the silence of a man who knows that what he is being asked to do is exactly what the pagans do every spring, and the only thing that separates him from them is that he believes God will see differently. He does not know how. He has no temple precedent, no prophetic word beyond the command itself. But the verb yair means that God's seeing is not passive observation. It is active intervention. The God who sees in order to provide. Abraham does not have evidence for this. He has only the verb, and he stakes everything on it. That is where the reader is standing, and the reader is likely not standing anywhere near a mountain with a knife. But the reader has been awake at night with a promise that seems to require the very thing that is being threatened. The text is not about whether you would sacrifice your child. It is about what you do with the gap between what God promised and what God appears to be asking. That gap is the test. The silence of Abraham is the answer to a question that no one has the courage to ask. What do you say when the command and the promise seem to contradict each other? Abraham says nothing. He keeps walking. And the walking itself is the trust. The reader who has faced a similar GAPA diagnosis that contradicts a prayer, a relationship ending that contradicts a vow, a door slamming shut that contradicts a calling knows exactly how heavy that 3-day walk is. The text does not rush through it. It gives the journey 3 days of narrative space. That space is the space of not knowing, and Abraham occupies it without a word. The reader may wonder if such silence is even possible, or if the text has simply chosen not to record what Abraham said under his breath. But the text does not let the reader remain with Abraham's silence. It forces a moment of speech. Isaac speaks, and Abraham answers with the only sentence that matters. And then the text returns to silence. The altar is built. The wood is laid. Isaac is bound. The word for bind is aked. It appears only here in the entire Hebrew Bible, and it becomes the technical term for this event, the akda, the binding. The word itself is rare and heavy. It carries the sense of being tied hand and foot, completely immobilized. Abraham reaches for the knife, and then the angel speaks. The angel calls Abraham's name twice, and Abraham's response is the same as it was at the beginning, Hineni, here I am. He has not moved. He has not flinched. He has not spoken a word of protest from the moment he left his tent. And now the angel says, do not lay your hand on the boy. Abraham lifts his eyes. The text uses the same root rahand. He sees the ram caught in the thicket. The seeing has become a sight. Abraham names the place Ihu Yairth, the Lord will see. The verb that began as a desperate hope has become a place name, a permanent marker in the landscape of faith. The seeing is not just something God does, it is something God is known by. The name of the mountain is the name of the encounter, and here the reader is meant to feel the weight of what Abraham did not do. He did not resist. He did not negotiate. He did not even ask the question that Job would later ask. Abraham went into the test with the silence of a man who has already surrendered the right to understand. That is one kind of faith. It is the kind that is celebrated in every sermon and every creed. But the reader who has tried to live inside that kind of silence knows that it is not the only kind of faith that exists. And the text itself knows this, because immediately after Abraham's story, the next patriarch is Jacob, and Jacob's encounter with God at night looks nothing like Abraham's. The text deliberately places these two stories near each other, as if to say here is the way of silence, and here is the way of struggle. Both are in the family. Both are part of the lineage. Jacob does not go silently. Jacob does not go obediently. Jacob goes kicking and clinging. Jacob's night encounter in Genesis 32 begins with fear, not the reverent fear of Abraham, but raw animal terror. Jacob has sent his family across the river, and he is left alone. The text says a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. The Hebrew word for wrestle is avik, and it carries the sense of dust and sweat and locked limbs. This is not a prayer meeting. This is a fight. Jacob does not submit to the stranger. He holds on. He demands a blessing. He refuses to let go until he gets it. And the stranger wounds him, dislocates his hip, and still Jacob will not release him. The difference between Abraham and Jacob could not be more stark. Abraham meets God in the silence of a mountain at dawn, and Jacob meets God in the mud of a riverbank at midnight. Abraham asks nothing. Jacob demands everything, and both of them are met. Both of them are named. Both of them walk away changed. But the difference is not in the result, the difference is in the posture, and the reader is left wondering which posture is the real one. The text does not answer that question. It leaves the reader standing between the two patriarchs, holding both silences and both screams, and waiting for the dawn. The text does not answer the question, because the text is not meant to be answered. The reader is not asked to choose between Abraham's silence and Jacob's struggle. The reader is asked to recognize that both are present in the same family, in the same covenant, in the same book. And if both are present, then both are accepted. The difference is not which posture God honors. The difference is what each posture reveals about the person who holds it. Abraham's silence reveals a man who has already released the outcome. Jacob's grip reveals a man who cannot release the outcome, but refuses to let go of the one who holds it. Both men are met. Both men are changed, and the reader who has spent years trying to be Abraham while secretly being Jacob may finally be able to stop pretending. The word that connects both encounters is the word for face. In Genesis 32, after the wrestling match, Jacob names the place Peniel, saying, I have seen God face to face, and my life has been preserved. The Hebrew is panim, el panim, face to face. The same root appears in Genesis 22 when Abraham names the mountain Ihu Yair, but the text adds that on the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. The seeing, the face, the presence, these are the same reality. Abraham saw God's provision. Jacob saw God's face. One saw from a distance, one saw up close in the dust, but both saw. And the Hebrew verb ra that drove Abraham's hope is the same verb that Jacob uses when he sees Esau's face in the next chapter and says, I have seen your face as one sees the face of God. The seeing is the thread that runs through both stories. The seeing is the point, But here is the tension that the reader must sit with if both men are accepted. Then why does the text give such different postures? Why not just one pattern? The answer lies in what each man needed. Abraham needed to learn that God sees before we speak. Jacob needed to learn that he could not earn the blessing by clinging, but he could receive it by not letting go of the one who gives it. Abraham needed silence. Jacob needed struggle. And the reader who is honest knows which one they need in this season. The text does not prescribe one method. It describes two encounters, and the reader is invited to find themselves in one of them. The reader who is currently in a season of silence, where every prayer feels like a stone dropped into a well with no splash, is not failing. They are walking the 3-day journey with Abraham. And the reader who is in a season of wrestling, where every prayer feels like a locked limb and a dislocated hip, is not failing either. They are holding on with Jacob. The cultural weight of the name change in Genesis 32 is not decorative. When the stranger asks Jacob his name, Jacob gives it Jacob, the heel grabber, the deceiver, the supplanter. And the stranger renames him Israel, which means he strives with God. The name change is not a reward. It is a description of what has just happened. Jacob has spent his entire life striving with men, and now he has striven with God and prevailed. The verb for prevailed is yakal, which means to be able to overcome, to endure. Jacob endured the night. He did not win the fight, was wounded, and he limped away. But he endured, and the endurance itself is the victory. The name Israel is given to a man who is broken and still holding on. The reader who has been told that faith means not struggling has not read this story carefully enough. The man who becomes the father of the 12 tribes is a man who limps. The wound is part of the name, and the blessing that Jacob demands is not a material blessing. The stranger asks him to let go, and Jacob says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The word for bless is barak, and it carries the weight of empowerment, of transfer of power. Jacob is not asking for things. He is asking for himself to be remade, and the stranger does bless him. But the blessing is not spoken. It is enacted in the renaming. Jacob becomes Israel. The blessing is the identity. The reader who has been praying for God to change their circumstances may have missed the deeper prayer that God would change their name. The blessing Jacob receives is not the removal of his fear of Esau. He still limps. He still sends gifts ahead. He still bows 7 times when he meets his brother. The blessing does not make his life easy. It makes his life his own. He is no longer living under the name he was given at birth. He is living under the name God gave him in the night. And here the reader is meant to feel the weight of the parallel with Abraham. Abraham also received a new name earlier in Genesis, from Abram to Abraham, father of many nations. And that name change came with a sign, the covenant of circumcision. Jacob's name change comes with a wound. Both are signs. Both are marks. Both are permanent. The reader who has been marked by a wound that will not heal a loss, a failure, a betrayal, a diagnosis that left a limp may be carrying the sign of an encounter they have not yet recognized. The limp is not the punishment. The limp is the evidence that you were held. The application of this is not abstract. The reader who has been told that their anger at God is a lack of faith has not read Jacob's story. Jacob wrestled with God in anger and fear, and God did not strike him down. God held him. God wounded him. God named him. The reader who has been told that their silence in prayer is a lack of zeal has not read Abraham's story. Abraham did not speak for 3 days, and God spoke first. The reader does not need to perform either silence or struggle. The reader needs to show up. The night is coming for both. The question is not whether you will be met. The question is whether you will recognize the meeting when it happens. The final detail that connects both stories is the dawn. In Genesis 22, Abraham lifts his eyes in the morning and sees the ram. In Genesis 32, the stranger says, "Let me go, for the dawn has broken." Both encounters end at dawn. Both men are released into light. The night was the container for the encounter, but the dawn is the release. The reader who is still in the night, still walking, still wrestling, still waiting, must know that the dawn will break. The texts do not say how long the night lasted for either man. For Abraham it was 3 days. For Jacob it was 1 night. But both nights ended. And when the dawn came, neither man was the same. Abraham called the place "the Lord will see." Jacob called the place "the face of God." Both men named the location of the encounter. Both men walked away with a geography of grace that they could return to. The reader may not have a mountain or a riverbank, but the reader has the story, and the story is a place you can return to again and again. The heaviest truth of this comparison is not that God meets both the silent and the struggling. It is that God meets both, and the difference is not in God. The difference is in what the person is able to receive. Abraham received the provision. Jacob received the blessing. Abraham saw the ram. Jacob saw the face. Both saw, both received. And the reader who has been in either posture knows that the only thing that matters is that the encounter happened. The posture was just the way you carried yourself into the room. The room itself was not changed by how you entered. The room was already there. The Lord was already seeing. The stranger was already waiting. The only question left for the reader is, have you stopped walking, stopped wrestling, long enough to know that you have already been met? The dawn is breaking. You are still holding something. The one who holds you has not let go.